not only killed her boyfriend, but like cut him up. He seems kind of fishy, a game changer for me. I think you should skip this one. Many levels of ick. I don't really think that it added like a ton. It was good. I've sort of already kind of purged it from my mind. I'm not really sure how much I can say on YouTube. Come on. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I've been procrastinating on making this video for far too long, and now I have to wrap up what I've read in the last 4 months. So in total, across all 4 months, I read 62 different things, which in July I read 46 of those. So I definitely fell into a bit of a reading slump after that, but I'm hoping that I'm finally bouncing back a little bit, hopefully getting back into reading now in November. So the first thing that I read, I actually reread the entire Haikyu series. So I think this was because I had just rewatched the anime. So I've talked about that extensively quite a bit. It's a shonen manga about boys volleyball. It's one of my favorite series of all time. I love it. It was very much just like a comfort reread. After that, I picked up a short story, and I actually originally listened to this on audiobook, but I have since purchased a physical copy. So I listened to The Yellow Wallpaper by Perkins Gilman. So this is about a woman who has recently given birth, and she's not feeling well mentally. And this is like back in the olden days when if a woman like wasn't feeling well, it was a 50-50 chance of her being burnt at the stake or pushed off a cliff or something. So her husband decides, oh, she just needs a little bit of fresh air. That'll help her. So he takes her to this like cottage and essentially locks her, imprisons her in this room in this cottage, and claims that she just needs to rest and then she'll start to feel better. And the more time she spends in this room, which has this yellow wallpaper, the crazier she starts to feel. So this was awesome. I think a lot of people really have a lot of high praise for this, and it definitely lived up to my expectations. After Haikyu, I was on a really big manga kick. So then I actually read the entire Hot Gimmich series by Miki Aihara. So I purchased all the omnibus volumes for this series. This is about a high school girl who lives in corporate housing with her family, and she gets blackmailed by her neighbor, who's this high school boy that she grew up with. And he kind of gets like some dirt on her, and he says, in exchange for keeping your secret, you have to become like my slave. So pretty dark shojo romance, but I really like it, and I read this as a kid, and obviously I liked it enough to now purchase the entire series as an adult. So definitely look up content warnings if you're interested, but I really like it. After that, I listened to another audiobook, this time a short story collection, and I think this was my first short story collection I've listened to on audiobook, and it was a much more enjoyable experience for me than reading them physically. That is The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson. I had heard quite a bit, obviously, about The Lottery. That might be arguably one of her most famous stories. I think I enjoyed this, and I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if I had read it physically. So definitely listening to short story collections on audiobook is a game changer for me. Some of my favorite stories from the collection were The Demon Lover, Like Mother Used to Make, The Renegade, After You, My Dear Alphonse, Charles, Flower Garden, of course, and obviously The Lottery was really good. So yeah, I think this definitely lived up to the hype, and you should check it out if you're interested. I then went on to pick up the graphic novel adaptation of The Lottery. So I think this was actually done by a descendant of Shirley Jackson, which was pretty cool, but it obviously wasn't better than the short story, and I don't really think that it added like a ton personally, but if you enjoy graphic novels and spooky stuff, you might like it. After that, I listened to The Dogs of Summer by Andrea Abreu Lopez, translated by Julia Sanchez. So this is about two young girls, very like coming of age, pretty much just like spending the summer together. This was pretty good. It definitely wasn't as much of a hit for me as I think it has been for other people, but what I did like about it is it really showed the gross side of girlhood. And I think when people think of girls, they think of cute, prim, proper, very innocent, but this book definitely showed the truer side of girlhood, where we're saying swear words with our friends behind our parents' backs, and we're gross, and we're probably just as obsessed with bodily functions, if not more so, than boys. I really liked that it had a rawer look at girlhood, and especially that sort of like wild and free feeling that kids get during the summer. Your parents just sort of let you outside, and then it was like, see you in 8 to 10 hours, and they have no idea what you're getting up to, you know? I would say if you're interested in this, you could check it out, but like I said, it wasn't as much of a hit for me as I think it has been for other people who have read this. Next, I read Jawbone by Monica Ojeda and translated by Sarah Booker. So this is about this group of high school girls. It really focuses on these two girls, and they're inseparable. They're basically like twins. They do everything everything together. They love each other. Their friendship kind of toes the line between friendship and romance. This book definitely explores themes of female sexuality and sort of like the horror of girlhood and adolescence and coming of age. So we're really focusing on these two girls, and then there's also a teacher who has recently transferred to their school who was driven out of her previous school because she was held hostage and like attacked by two of her previous students. So we're also sometimes following this teacher who kind of already had a tenuous grip on reality, and then after this incident with her past students, she is even more volatile and unpredictable. I obviously read this like almost 3 months ago now, and I can't remember a ton about it. I don't remember it being bad, but while it was really good in the moment and while I read it, it didn't really leave a super huge impression on me. Will I read more Monika Ojeda? Definitely. I like her and her writing style and the themes that she explores, but it was good, but that's kind of about it for me. Next, I read Helpmeet by Nabin Ruthnam. This was a really weird one. I was really excited for this one going in because this is about this married couple in like the 1900s. The husband is sick, and as the wife is caring for him, she's starting to realize that maybe his sickness isn't a physical one or even really like one of this world. I don't remember a single thing about this really. I just remember it fell very flat for me. I did not enjoy it. I've sort of already kind of purged it from my mind. So I think in some ways doing a wrap up this long after reading something is sort of illuminating in some ways, because it's like even if I really liked it when I've put it down, if it doesn't really leave that much of an impression on me, then that's kind of telling in its own way, you know? But what I do remember is when I put this down, I did not like it at all. So I think you should skip this one. Next, I listened to another short story. This was a reread for me because I actually read this in high school and I was blown away when I read it in high school. So I wanted to revisit it to see if it still held up. That is Hunters in the Snow by Tobias Wolff. This is about 3 male acquaintances, maybe friends. It depends on your definition of the word friend. And they are setting off in the really early morning to go hunting in the snow. This is a very intensive character study, and I think what really impresses me about this story is that despite how short it is, you get such a clear picture of who these characters are, what drives them. They feel so tangible and real in such a short amount of time. The plot also is pretty twisty-turny, and it packs quite a punch, and really exploring themes of masculinity, toxic masculinity, male relationships, male friendships, and sort of how toxic masculinity may hold men back from establishing these genuine friendships and genuine connections, and how never allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone can really negatively affect you. I think I also really like this because these characters are not good people, and it's for very different reasons. I love to read about bad people doing bad things. I love that feeling of getting to know a character and then still being so shocked by their actions and being left in disbelief at the end of a sentence because you just cannot fathom someone doing this in real life. And it's not to say that there's a lot of super awful, disturbing things happening in this. I mean, there are, definitely check trigger warnings, but it's not like it's the most disturbing thing I've ever read. So I think it's really just a testament to the author's writing and ability to construct a character. So that's my really long way of saying I think you should read this short story. Next, I read another manga, that is Dementia 21 Volume 2 by Shintaro Kago. I had previously read the first volume and it was really goofy, wacky, funny, cool. So I wanted to read the second one. This is about a woman who is like a home care nurse. So she does house calls and will take care of elderly folks as needed. Shintaro Kago is often known for his horror and surreal works. But this is interesting because while it's still very surreal, it leans a lot more into the humor of surrealism. Like, for example, there's a woman who has dementia, but as she forgets things, they physically blip out of existence. So if she forgets a person, they physically disappear from existence. So that's obviously like very horrific, but the way that Shintaro Kago writes it and presents it and sets up the scene, it ends up being kind of funny as well, and like I said, pretty wacky. So each chapter is like a different little story of this woman as she's taking care of these elderly folks and encountering these mishaps along the way. Next, I read a classic that is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I can't remember if I read this in high school. It's one of those deals where I maybe was supposed to read it and then I sort of just like bullshit my way through the discussions in class without having actually read it because I was vaguely familiar with it, but this was my first time really actually reading it, and giving it my all. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is about a woman named Setha who escapes enslavement. The story mostly takes place shortly after the Civil War. She and her family are being haunted by the ghost of her baby. So while Setha is recalling the events of her past and then reuniting with some people from her past, she actually meets this girl, this young woman, at a carnival, and she claims that her name is Beloved. And Setha is immediately drawn to her because Beloved is what she called her baby that died. And as Beloved gets closer and closer to Setha, we learn more and more about the events that unfolded that led up to the death of Setha's baby. So this is another pretty surreal one. Toni Morrison is an author unlike any I've ever read before. Her writing and the way that she crafts stories is so singular. I'm sure this is not the first time you've heard someone saying this is a really good book, but this was really good. Really good. I think this was the first book to make me cry this year as well, and it really snuck up on me, so I would definitely check this one out. I listened to this partially on audiobook, and it's narrated by Toni Morrison, which was really good. So yeah, if you were like me and had not yet jumped on the Toni Morrison bandwagon, come on. Next, I leaned back into some manga, so I read the entire series Bisengast by M. Alice Legros. This was a very mid to late 2000s series. The style immediately drew me in. It's a very tokyopop release, if you remember that publishing company. So this is about a girl named Dinah whose parents died tragically, and she now lives with her aunt in this dusty old mansion. And she's like not doing well mentally. Like she can't sleep, she's not making friends at school, she's pretty much just like a shut-in, and she has this one friend. And they stumble upon this mausoleum, which they had never seen before despite being really familiar with the area. And they end up stumbling on this like society of entities and beings that basically go out and find ghosts and have to like resolve their issues and put them to rest. I love the style of this manga, but the story was not great. It definitely left me wanting, but there were so many panels from this manga that I will remember forever. So I think if you're even a little bit intrigued, and especially if you're into the style of this, you should definitely check this one out. Next, I read another manga series. This is one that I started and immediately became obsessed with. That is My Love Mix-Up. This is like kind of hard to explain, and I've talked about this quite a bit, but basically this is a shoujo romance manga between two high school boys, but then they also have these two friends, and in general we're exploring themes of young love and that confusing time when you don't even really know what it means to like someone, and having to parse apart the feeling of, do I actually like this person back, or am I just flattered that they are interested in me? You know? I was amazed at how much I enjoyed this. Usually this kind of wholesome, to the bone type series isn't really enough to keep me engaged, but this was just so freaking cute and it was so funny. These are characters you want to root for. So I think you should read this series. Next, I read another manga. This was a standalone boys love manga, and this was actually a recommendation by a bookstagrammer, and she reads a lot of similar stuff as I do, so we ended up having a conversation about boys love, and I asked her for some recommendations, and this was one of her recommendations. That is Midnight Rain by CTK. First and foremost, the art style is fantastic in this. It's just gorgeous to look at. This is definitely like a grittier romance. Two guys basically like scraping to get by, and they happen to meet in a laundromat one night. They definitely live in a rougher area of town. The one guy is like, hey, you look like you've been kind of beaten up. Do you want to come stay at my place if you don't have anywhere else to stay? And then some stuff ends up happening. It was really good and you should read it. Next, I read a novella called You Should Have Left by Daniel Keelman, translated by Ross Benjamin. This is about a guy who is writing a sequel for a movie that did really well, but he's struggling to write. So he takes his family to this secluded Airbnb. Very much Shining vibes. Like, I need to go to the secluded area to get some writing done. And then it turns out that maybe isolating yourself doesn't always do great things for your mental health. So the more time that he spends there with his family, weirder and weirder stuff starts to happen. And it becomes this thing of like, am I going crazy? Is the house haunted? Is there something larger than life at play that I don't even have the words or vocabulary to even begin to describe? That's kind of the journey that this book goes on. I personally didn't really care for it too much. It was fine. It's not like I finished it and was like, man, I regret reading that. I wish I had that time back. But it was fine. Next, I read The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. This this is a new release, and this was pretty good. This was everything I wanted The Secret History by Donna Tartt to be. So we're following this group of rich white kids in LA in the 80s. They're kind of just like doing their rich white kid things. They're driving their nice cars. They're listening to the music of the time. They're wearing their expensive designer clothes. They're sleeping around. And we're really focusing on this friend group. And then this new guy joins the school and gets brought into the friend group. And there's this mystery element that gets involved as well. People that they are kind of connected to are being stalked by this serial killer, and then a bunch of people end up getting killed. So as this new kid enmeshes himself more and more into the friend group, our main character starts to really question, like, is this guy, he seems kind of fishy, you know? So he's like trying to figure out the mystery of the serial killer, and then also like try to figure out what's going on with this guy. But then it's also like he's jealous of him, so you're never really sure if you can trust him as the narrator. So yeah, if that sounds kind of good to you, you could check it out. Next, I read Astral Season, Beastly Season by Tahi Saihate, and that was translated by Kalau Almami. So the cover is amazing. I love it. And the synopsis is what hooked me even more. This takes place in Japan, and we're following these two high school boys who are obsessed with this J-pop idol. And very early on, it is reported that this idol that they love not only killed her boyfriend, but like cut him up. And they are in such disbelief that she could be capable of that. So what they do is they start going around killing people to make it seem like they're the ones who killed the boyfriend, because they don't want the J-pop idol to get in trouble. I really like stories examining fandom culture. I think this is obviously a very extreme example of the lengths a super fan will go to protect their idol, and kind of the like scary side of fandom culture. So when I first finished this, I was like, that was like just okay. But since finishing it, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, and I really loved it. So I think you should read it too. Next, I read another little short book called Prosper's Demon by KJ Parker. It's like back in the olden days, and there's like this group of people who work in the church, and their main job is to exorcise demons from people. So they're able to like telepathically communicate with demons and rip them out of their hosts and exorcise them. But we're following this main guy who is one of those priests, and he gets into kind of a sticky situation because there's a demon who has latched onto a royal baby that has just been born, and he has to sort of tread lightly because he doesn't want to exorcise the demon and then kill the baby, because then he'll probably just get killed. So it became more about like this political cat and mouse kind of game more than I was anticipating. So while I was reading it, I was like, this is not really what I was wanting, but I am glad I finished it because I did like how it ended. So I don't know, it was a short read. It was fine. You could read it if you want. Next, I read another classic, and that is In Praise of the Stepmother by Mario Vargas Llosa, and this was translated by Helen Lane. This was such a tumultuous read. This was one where while I was reading it, my star rating changed so drastically from page to page. At one point, it was literally a 1 star, and then it went up, and then it went down, and then it went up, and then finally I settled on 5 stars. This was so good, unlike anything I've ever read before. So sharp and smart and timeless commentary, in my opinion. So this is about a married couple, and the woman in the couple becomes fixated on the stepson, and she begins a sexual relationship with the stepson, who I should note is a very young boy. So many levels of ick to unpack there. So the story is really progressed by this shifting perspective between the husband and the wife. And it's really interesting because each chapter is really short and is also accompanied by a piece of art. And it's sort of like what the character is exploring and going through in that short chapter is closely related to the piece of art. And it's sort of like the author was using a specific interpretation of the art to build and craft the narrative. So yes, I highly, highly, highly recommend this one. It's weird, it's wild, but I think you should do it. Next, I read a book for book club, The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. Definitely not one I would have picked up on my own, but that's what I love about our book club. The 4 of us are very different and have very different reading styles, so it's really been pushing me to read books outside of what I normally would pick up. So this is about this husband and wife and daughter, and the husband is a Vietnam veteran who has raging unmanaged PTSD. So a lot of trigger warnings in this, very, very heavy domestic violence. So someone he served with while in Vietnam passes away, away and leaves his house in Alaska to them. And by house, I mean like backwater shack. So they move cross country to the Alaskan bush. We're following the family as their daughter, who starts out as a young girl, then is raised in this Alaskan bush. And they're having to deal with learning how to survive in the Alaskan bush and also navigating the father's mental health issues that are not being addressed, and alcoholism and domestic violence. Definitely not one that I would pick up on my own. I don't think Kristin Hannah is really like an author that really is for me personally. So I don't know if I'll read any more of hers, but this wasn't bad by any means. Next, I read another boys' love that's also a standalone, and that is Liquor and Cigarettes by Ranmaro Zaria. This author is, I think, the master of building an erotic scene. Their art is just so beautiful. This is about childhood friends who are in this seaside town. It's very much like Mediterranean vibes. And one of them owns a liquor shop and the other one owns a cigarette shop. And the one who owns a liquor shop is not really able to hold his liquor, but he gets peer pressured into participating in this like wine drinking contest at this like annual wine festival in the town. And the guy who owns the cigarette shop is like, hey, I'll help you train to like be able to drink more. And then stuff happens. I'm not really sure how much I can say on YouTube, but it's a boys' love, guys, so some love is happening, and I really liked it, so you should read it too. Next, I read a horror that is Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi. This takes place exclusively in the winter, so I wish I had read this in the winter, but it was still really good. This gets likened to Lord of the Flies quite a bit because we're in this boys' orphanage that's in this, it's like a remodeled church, and it's ran by this pastor who is really strict and abusive. And one night, this group of guys stumbles into the church and they're like, hey, we need medical assistance. And it turns out that the sheriff's brother was very badly wounded because he was found doing some sort of like ritual wherein they were like sacrificing a child. So they bring him to the church, basically like letting all of this chaos into the church. They unwittingly perhaps unleash something on the orphanage. And the boys then have to deal with the fallout of that. So this was very good. I have been known to really love Lord of the Flies, so I think I kind of am a sucker for kids fighting to the death, I guess. But yeah, this was really good. This had some really good scenes of gore. I think you should read it. And then last, I read another horror. This one is Maeve Fly by CJ Lead. This is about a female Patrick Bateman-esque character who is kind of drifting through life in Los Angeles. She lives with her pretty much like on life support grandma in her LA home, and she is this Disney princess, which, you know, they don't actually say Disney, but she's Elsa from Disney. She dresses up and goes to Disneyland, and that's her job. But she's obviously this very like nihilistic, misanthropic character. She doesn't fit in, but she doesn't want to fit in. I'm not like other girls, etc., etc. But then her friend has a brother, and the brother ends up moving to LA. And when she meets the brother, they develop this relationship that leaves our main character feeling really unmoored and unstable, and like she no longer has control over her life. Yeah, I mean, I think this was fine. I had higher hopes for it, but she's weird, she kills people. I liked what this story had to say about women and their capacity for violence, and when women are allowed to be violent, and when stories have previously allowed women to be violent. But in general, I didn't like this very much. I feel like some of the scenes that should have been serious and like violent and like, oh my god, I'm so disturbed, ended up being kind of silly to me. If you liked it, I'm so happy for you, but I did not. So that's everything I read in the last 4 months. I obviously really was like trying to speed through and like be as concise and efficient as possible because I didn't want this video to be 11 years long. So you can like this video if you want, comment, subscribe if you want. I would love to have you. And let me know if you've read any of these. Did you love them? Did you hate them? What are some books I should read based on the books that I read here and liked? Let me know. Would love to hear from you. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. Love you. Bye.